This is the HBB HADES and this is the Fat Freak Scarlet Mini. Both have a crap ton of bass, but they sound completely different from one another, especially in the upper mids and the treble. Starting with the HADES, these are made for high volume blasting. For the graph readers out there, you might think it sounds atrocious. I mean, just look at the upper mids and the treble roll off. There's none. The point of the HADES is for those who want to hear the bass and a lot of it. These are made for bass heads who want to like blast their music to the moon. Like me, for example, which is why the upper mids and the treble needs to be cut, or else, number one, it's gonna sound too sharp at higher volumes, meaning you can't fully blast these and be super immersed with the bass without some form of sharpness, as you can experience it with like other bass head, quote unquote bass head IEMs. And number two, it allows the low end to be more forward and just take over the rest of the frequency and feel super engaging. I want to make this very clear, the HADES is definitely not balanced. For the Harman diffuse field lovers, look away. At mid volume, the vocals and treble are noticeably drowned out. I would not recommend these for any vocals, classical, no indie, no K-pop, no busy music. It simply will feel like you're listening to music underwater or through a can at mid volume. But at higher volumes, the vocals and treble become more, quote unquote normal. Still more in the background, definitely not as open, airy, detailed, because the main purpose of this tuning is to bring forth the low end and really let that like bass slam your brains out. And oh boy, does it slam. It's not an all-rounder by any means. The HADES is a very niche IEM made for those same people who blast their bass like so loud it literally shakes their car. In other words, if you want bass and only bass, then these will smack your brains out, because it pretty much pushes back like all the other frequencies and only focuses on the low end. These are amazing for hip hop and rock at high volumes, or like anything with a lot of drums, sub bass, and a lot of low end. Again, mid volume, I wouldn't recommend these, but crank it up and just have fun with it. It's not that deep. Tuning wise, it's warm and dark leaning. The impact is heavy, very authoritative, and you can feel the rumble in your chest, kind of like a subwoofer, but obviously not as good as like a real subwoofer, right? It's basically like a very cheap subwoofer, like a cheap car subwoofer, and for $40, I'm cool with it. Now, the control and decay is definitely not as good as the Scarlet Minis. It's a very like dirty type of bass, kind of like eating a double Big Mac with large fries, apple pies, and a McFlurry. You definitely feel the mid bass bleeding and taking over the rest of the sound. Vocals are a little bit muddy, they're colored 100%, like no ways around that. Feels congested, and the treble extension is simply not there. I mean, even if you are cranking these up, they're still missing that extension and openness, but that's not the point of the HADES. My guess is that HBB or Chris, who made these for low end to be like super forward, in your face kind of presentation. Like if you just want low end, shut off your brain and let the bass blast your brains out kind of things, then you'll be okay with the rest of the FR, because bass. But if you're a balanced kind of guy or like a clean or airy sound, then yeah, these are definitely not for you. The HADES are simply made for a different demographic, and if you're looking for something more balanced but still bass head level, then yeah, the Scarlet Minis. These are somewhat natural and balanced, obviously not like Harman diffuse field, right? But it does the balanced bass head signature very good. The treble extension and mid-range is a lot better compared to the HADES. It cuts through the sub bass even with it having like a 20 dB bass shelf. And the reason why it works is because the mid bass is very well controlled. If you can tell from the graph, there's like a scoop, not a scoop, but like it stops at around 200 hertz mark, and a lot tamer than the HADES. The bass notes decay faster and doesn't linger as long, which allows the Scarlet to still have like a somewhat natural vocal presentation. It's by no means like a vocal set like the RS5 or something like that, not super airy or anything like that, but the rest of the FR does enough to not let the sub bass completely drown out the rest of the sound. Versus the Maestro Minis, the Scarlet is basically the Maestro Minis but with even more sub bass. The Scarlets have more of a low and forward approach, as the upper mids are tamer than the Maestros, which shifts the overall focus onto that sub bass region, and you really feel that rumble, and that extra 5 dBs of bass really separates the Scarlets apart from the Maestros. So the way I see it is that the Maestro Minis are more acceptable for most quote unquote bass heads or people who are just trying to get into more bass, as it has like a similar sound to the Legatos, which is a nice bassy set but not like super bass head, I would say. Whereas the Scarlet, on the other hand, is really for those bass heads that can handle that extra amount and enjoys getting their ears destroyed, like a much funner listening experience without sacrificing too much of the vocals and the treble. And as for the HADES, these are for those who are at the bottom of the bass head iceberg, the people who do like anything to get just like a little bit more low end. They don't care about the vocals or the treble, all they want is bass. In terms of scaling, the Hades are the best out of all the bass heads that I have heard so far. You can't really crank the Scarlets, the Maestros that high without bumping into some form of sharpness. Again, great mid to slightly high volume sets, but not like super blast your brains out kind of set. And slam wise, the Hades also slams a lot harder in the mid bass when it comes to like the drums, the bass guitars, the overall impact, because it just has more mid bass. Like, just look at the graph. The overall sound feels fuller, it feels heavier, it feels warmer on the Hades. And I found on some tracks, the monster sub bass on the Scarlet can get a little bit too much and kind of distort and bleed into the vocals a bit. Now, I didn't find this issue at mid volume or with the Maestro Minis. It just kind of distorts the vocals if you crank it up too much. The sub bass is still a lot, right? These things ain't cheap. But for most people though, I would say the Maestro Minis or the Scarlet would be better. Like, it just doesn't sound as bloated and as muddy as the Hades, because the Hades literally just it's just all bass. It literally means the god of the underworld. You're getting Drake down there for more bass. The KBEAR ROSEFINCH is also still a good option. It's like the Hades, but it's not as dark. It's got like a little treble peak somewhere in the like 8-10k region. The vocals aren't as buried, and just overall like it's more audible, not natural or normal by any means, but it's a little bit more audible than the Hades. Now, the trade-off is that the low end isn't as forward as the Hades, because the Hades have like a darker treble, which tilts the focus onto the low end more. They're more forward, and overall it just doesn't scale as well as the Hades because of the peak. And personally, if I'm already in that deep, like if I already want that much bass, I might as well just go for the bass. Go for the Hades and get all the bass I can get. Quality wise, they're both pretty similar. Both do get muddy sometimes, not very good on fast tracks, not recommended for a lot of the genres. Again, bass only. And versus some other sets that are less bass head but still bassy and warm, like the BLON Z300, the QKZ HBB, those two are obviously not gonna slam your brains out like the Hades, the ROSEFINCH, or even some of the Fat Freak stuff. They're more, of like a warm bassy set. The bass is good, but not quite bass at levels. It's just less of it. Both the QKZ and the Blondes are, more balanced. They're obviously not harm diffuse field or anything like that. They're still warm and colored. You can still tell the vocals are like huskier. They're like not as open and extended, but it's more palatable to most people, and the extension in the treble is better and just overall leans into that musical warm tuning versus just like strictly bass. All in all, the Hades get a recommended, also not a recommended, depending on what you're looking for. Like, if you just want bass, these are it. If you want anything that's like balanced, yeah, these are not it. And as for the Scarlet Minis, it gets like a half recommendation, I would say. For most people, the Maestro Minis will still be better. It has more extension. It's not as bassy. It's like quote unquote more balanced bass head, right? But if you can handle the extra sub bass, then these are pretty good. Basically, if you're a bass head, it really comes down to 3 pathways. Number 1, if you like that deep sub bass rumble but don't want it coloring the rest of the frequency, get the legatos and then save up for either the Maestro Minis, which is pretty much a direct upgrade to legatos, or the Scarlet Minis if you want even more sub bass than the Maestros. And if you don't have the cash for the legato, don't worry about it. You can also go for the original Truth Year Zero, the blue ones, the HBB Con, or like any tuning with a sub bass boosted scoop. The second pathway is that if you like a bassy and warmer leaning set, then start off with the QKZ HBB or the BLON Z300 and then just skip the rest. Save up for the Zigat Daschinko. You really don't need anything past that, and anything in between is kind of like a waste of money. The Daschinko is pretty much endgame worm set for the vast majority of people. Then finally, at number 3, for those bass degenerates like me, if you only want bass and the most bass, so you don't care about the vocals, the treble, or balanced sound, like you're literally just here to get destroyed by the low end, then just go straight for the HBB Hades. Crank these babies way up and just have a fun time. It's not that deep. As for the ROSEFINCH, it also works well just like at mid volume, so if you listen like not as loud, get the ROSEFINCH. As for the Grand Maestro, when I demoed them, the bass quality, the control, the decay, the vocals, the treble extension, and the overall refinement and balance is, really good, quote unquote end game, whatever you want to call it. It's the best out of all the, bass sets that I've heard, but the diminishing returns are astronomical. In my opinion, it's also not like a quote-unquote bass head set. It's more of like a bassy bass boosted set, because there's just not enough bass to be bass head. Like, don't get me wrong, it's got a good amount of low end, more of a sub boosted, like adjusted diffuse field, but it's definitely not a bass head like the Scarlet Minis, for example, or like even the Hades. The vast majority of people who aren't bass heads are gonna love the tuning. They're gonna think like the bass is very good, but it's not enough for bass heads. It definitely has better technicalities, resolution, separation. It just needs more bass to pass as a quote-unquote bass head. Like, I think you're better off going something cheaper like the Scarlet Minis or the MAESTRO Minis. Anyways, a lot of good options for bass heads right now, so we eating good. And as for the Syncontras, it's not quite like bass head, I would say. Review on that soon. But aside from that, I hope this guide was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see everyone in the next one.